After the previous episode included a few GT1 cars converted into Super GT specification, we'll be beginning this episode with another one. However, this one has the unique distinction of being a car that's competed in both the GT500 and GT300 class. You're probably aware of the team known as JLock, the acronym for the Japanese Lamborghini Owners Club. Now, they'd been in the JGTC scene for quite a while, competing with a Diablo, but with not too much success. However, for the 2004 JGTC season, they'd race the GT1 version of the Murcielago built by Reiter Engineering. Effectively, it was the replacement for the Diablo. For 2005, the car started off in the GT500 class, but midway through the year, the team would enter a second car, this time in the GT300 class. Fundamentally, the car was basically the same as the GT500 car, but had the enormous 6-litre V12 detuned to make sure it complied with the GT300 regulations. Main reason this was done was simply because in GT500 spec, the Murcielago just wasn't competitive enough. The car would still run with similar amounts of cornering ability as the GT1/GT500 car, but it was clear that with the detuned engine, the Lambo fitted into the GT300 class well pace-wise. In 2006, this car did get JLock the team's first ever victory, albeit this was the only time the Murcielago would get a victory. But nonetheless, at least the car was able to finish in the points with more regularity than this team had done before, collecting 3 more podium finishes along the way too during this car's run in Super GT, until the car was retired at the end of the 2009 season, where the team dedicated their time to their own GT300 spec Lamborghini Gallardo that began competing in Super GT in the 2007 season, and which, to be honest, was not having the best of times. Again, as the years went on, the results did seem to get better, collecting 3 podiums, once in 2010 and twice in 2011. However, things seemed to get better for the team when they switched to the Reiter Engineering developed GT3 version of the Gallardo. Now, of course, since then, they've become GT300 class champions in 2024 with the Huracan. A glorious moment for the fan favourite team, and almost consistently perennial underdogs of Super GT. Now, this next car you're probably familiar with if you've played the Gran Turismo video game series. However, if you haven't played or seen any videos on any of the Gran Turismo titles, or watched any Super GT races, then you're probably not aware of this car, or even heard of it whatsoever. It's called the ASL Garaiya, or however you're meant to say the last name, which I probably mispronounced by accident. Now, this is based on a road car, or at least what was intended to be a road car, as unfortunately this car never actually made it into production. Interesting fact about this car is that, funnily enough, a couple of prototypes that were constructed were built in Norwich in England, which is a bit strange to think about, but hey, that's just how it was. ASL stands for Autobacks Sports Car Laboratory, and for those that don't know, Autobacks, or more specifically Autobacks 7, is an automotive car part and accessory brand in Japan. So already a pretty bonkers story, and we haven't even gotten to talking about the race car yet. It started competing in 2003 in JGTC, but after struggling with its straight line speed, it was given a more powerful, naturally aspirated 3.5 litre Nissan-derived V6. This made the car a more competitive proposition. However, it had to demonstrate its performance fairly quickly, as for 2005, Aguri Suzuki, who was the team director and team founder, said that if the car didn't win the GT300 championship, they'd end the programme at the conclusion of the year. And seeing as they got 3rd in the standings, still an impressive achievement all the same, it was over for the project. At least for the time being, because in 2007, to celebrate the ARTA team's 10th anniversary, they'd shipped the car back over from France and returned to compete in the GT300 class for 2007. The car would continue to be competitive, always being fairly consistent, but it would never end up getting that elusive title, finishing in the runner-up spots in the championship 3 times, with the 2004 and 2008 campaigns in particular being pretty agonising, where they were 1 point behind the respective champions from those seasons. The car's journey as a racer would come to an end in 2012, where at the conclusion of that season, it would no longer be compliant to GT300 regulations, as effectively entries that were running vehicles that were small, boutique, low-volume production cars would no longer be allowed. And seeing as the Garaiya didn't even make it into production at all, It spelled the end of the road for this brilliant vehicle in Super GT. A shame, but I guess whilst we're on the subject of cars being built in Norfolk, well, okay, this isn't entirely accurate because this GT300 car wasn't built in Norfolk. The car it's based around is a Norfolk-built thing, but this specific thing wasn't constructed there. In fact, despite being based on the car that was built from Norfolk, the Lotus Evora GT300 MC shares practically no components with the road-going version of the Lotus Evora. The only bits that did may have included the badge, door handles, and windscreen wiper. The Evora was a little bit of a trip into the unknown for Lotus. It still tried to keep to the Lotus formula of lightweight and excellent handling characteristics, but unlike the Elise, 340R and 211 models that were fairly bare bones on the creature comfort side of things, the Evora was a little more luxurious. I mean, it wasn't exactly Bentley levels of luxury, but compared to the Lotuses prior to the Evora, it might as well have been. The GT300 variant though was a completely hardcore racer. Similar to the Toyota Mark X that we went over in the previous episode, this Evora, in quotation marks, was based on Super GT's mother chassis platform, and this also meant that this car was powered by a Nissan-derived V8 engine, which is actually quite ironic because the road-going Evora was powered by a 3.5 litre V6 from a Toyota. So how did the car fare? Well, the Lotus, which was run by the Cars Tokai Dream 28 team from 2015 to 2020, before then collaborating to form the Muta Racing Inging team from 2021, had a rather topsy-turvy finishing record. In 2015, it had just one top 10 result, of 7th, before then having 4 seasons of no top 10s at all. They finally broke that top 10 barrier again in 2020, by winning, and collecting another podium the race after that, before then not collecting another top 10 the rest of the year. 3 more top 10s would then follow in 2021, one of which being another victory. However, the team decided to switch to a GT300 version of the Toyota GR86 for the 2022 Super GT season, and the Evora hasn't been seen in Super GT since. Given the Evora is now no longer being produced, it's highly improbable we'll see this thing race again. Even so, it was cool to see a bit of a left field choice from the world of sports cars get turned into a crazy racing car. Or rather, a few small parts of a left field sports car get put onto a crazy racing car. Oh, and it also came with some teeth on its livery. We'll end this episode with a Porsche, which seems a bit odd. Porsches competing in GT racing? That's a fairly typical sight. Not this Porsche though. Arctech Motorsports had entered the JGTC with the more usual 996 GT3 in 2003. Now, it wasn't a particularly standout season for them by any stretch, but given how successful and popular a race car the 996 was, it would have been a safe choice to stick with the car for next year, especially given it was their debut season. However, the team's manager, Hideo Kaneko, again, probably got the pronunciation wrong, so sorry about that, apparently thought that the team should create a brand new race car. And that brand new race car would be based around the 968. Now, they'd be a 2-car effort, with the 968 racing alongside the 996 they'd already campaigned, albeit the 996 wouldn't enter all the races that year. Here's the thing though, the 968 started competing in 2004. The production model of this car lasted from 1991 to 1995. Now, it doesn't take a lot of guessing to realise that this car was making its debut nearly a decade after the 968 had ended its production. Sure, the 968 was a good base car, and of course it would be built under early 2000s technology, but you'd have to imagine that the nearly decade-old platform wouldn't have been an advantage. We have had some similar examples in GT racing. Take Emil Frey Racing's Jaguar XK GT3, which continued to compete in SRO organised GT races in 2017, despite the XK model no longer being in production since 2014. Something else to consider about the 968 was its lack of spare parts. The 968 wasn't exactly a mass-produced car. Just over 12,750 were thought to be made. And also take into account that other 968s didn't have this sort of aerodynamically tailored body kit as an option. How much of the road-going 968 actually made its way onto this bespoke GT300 version? I don't know. But one thing it did have from its production variant was its engine, a 3-litre turbocharged inline-4, which the team developed a little bit more to produce more power. With all this information in mind, it's sadly perhaps not that much of a surprise that this car's time in the series wasn't all that great. It would have a best finish of 19th in 2004, before the car was then campaigned in 2005 by Team Lejeune, where it would retire from 5 of that season's 8 Super GT races. 2005 would be the last year of competition for this car. A shame, because it looked amazing, and it was certainly different, that's for sure. Alas, it doesn't seem all that surprising that this project didn't show a lot of race-winning speed. Now, this isn't the only example of an earlier generation car being put into JGTC racing action, once that production version had ended its, well, production. The C4 Corvette ended its production midway through 1996, but in 2002, Zipspeed tried to compete in the GT300 class of JGTC with a C4 Corvette. Sadly, that seemed to fare even less well than the 968 did, as from what I can tell, it failed to start for any of its races. I'd love to tell you more about this car, but I can't seem to find any technical specs about it, so it's a bit tricky in that respect. Although, at least with this car, we know 100% that it does still exist, as it goes to some Japanese car shows, which is definitely cool. But either way, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, then I'd be incredibly appreciative if you did hit the like and subscribe buttons. However, until the next episode of this, or indeed whatever the next video may be kind to each other and enjoy the rest of your day.